So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hope you've had a good lunch, and we are ready to start with our next set of discussions and deliberations and further exploring the role of the CFO. Right now we have the special address where we are going to be looking into the enterprise risk management from the CFO's point of view, the CFO's role from board to the bottom line in this digital world. Would like to invite our speaker, Mr. Madhusudan Jain, the co-founder and CIO of iVirtualCFO.
Check. Good afternoon. I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, but I will say brothers and sisters of CFO, community of financial organizations, or community of finance officers, whatever you like. It's a privilege to be here where the IQ level is so high and the buzz has been great since morning. And I'm sure each one of you are feeling the same. However, coming after such a great lunch, let's make sure that the BU from the BUZZ does not get dropped off. So I've taken liberty. I'm going to show you a video of 90 seconds. Let's talk after we see the video.
He's the kind of guy who doesn't take life too seriously.
Oh no.
But then life is just too unpredictable.
Did you read your policy, Mr. Myers?
Comprehensive!
Except in acts of God. Sorry.
We do nothing wrong! I'm not finished with you! I'll give you acts of God! I'll give you whirlwinds!
You're going to sue one of the world's biggest insurance companies.
Well, apparently I wouldn't stand a chance. I'm suing God. Do you think I've done the right thing, Arthur?
Sometimes I don't know what the world's coming to.
Stop talking to the bloody dog.
Many people might think this is the work of a crank.
Well, yeah. I just want the boat back.
That's why you need me.
What are the others doing about it? They're all praying. They should be praying for better lawyers.
Regular Bonnie and Clyde, aren't you? It's a brilliant scam.
This year, a guy with a grudge
You can't possibly win, because they can't afford to lose.
becomes a man on a mission.
You're on an outrunning action against someone who doesn't exist.
Well, I hope he does. I spent half the morning singing to him. What are you going to do?
Make his miserable life more miserable.
There's supposed to get out of here!
Do you know what we need, Arthur? Some kind of sign.
Jeez!
It's a messenger.
It's a flying cockatoo.
Billy Connolly is the man who sued God.
Oh, that's very good.
What do you think? It's a great movie. I like it for the drama. I like it for the theme. And above all, the comedy, which is absurd, you know, who wants to sue God? But yet I think there's some logic to it. You have risk, his boat is blown off. You have regulation, insurance companies, act of God, comprehensives, exclusions, you name it, it's all there. So, it's OMG. And I was wondering, what is OMG, you know, the Indian version of this movie. And I just went around asking my daughter, her friends. They all came back and said, you know what OMG is, right? I said, what? Well, we call it, oh my, guys. And then I asked the guys. They said, we call it, oh my, gals. And finally, guess what? My wife sends me a message one day. Oh my G is very naughty today. I said, who, what? She said, oh my Gunda. So there you go, guys. So that's oh my G. Oh my God. That's truly what it is. And since we are in OMG territory, the ultimate arbiter of risk, let's talk about risk. The theme of the conference is cost, right? Catalyst, operations, strategy, technology. And I see at the logo that has been so beautifully made, what's missing is the salt or the risk management which sits behind each one of these aspects here. And that's what we're going to talk about. Risk truly transcends the top of the pyramid to the base, from present to the future, you name it. So there is no escape, my friends. And risk is really as old as mankind, right? Remember Adam eating the apple? And guess what happened? The rest is history. And Menaka the Apsara, despite knowing what would happen, went and danced in front of sage Vishwamitra. These acts are best described by the author Atul Gawande, whose bestseller book, Checklist Manifesto. If you guys have had a chance, I love that book, it's great. He begins making a distinction between errors of ignorance, which is basically mistakes we make because we don't know enough. The first risk, Adam didn't know what he was doing. Errors of inaptitude, mistakes we make because we don't make proper use of what we know. Well, guess what? Failure in the modern world is really about the second of these errors. This element is applicable to risk, and squarely so. Finally, in this season of rediscovering Indian ancient history, where we are attributing a lot of the current things to Indian mythology and ancient knowledge, everything, I thought it would be appropriate to look at risk. Risk really has been codified about 3,000 years ago. And if you don't believe me, let's see. Let me read it out for you. As between land, dependent on rain, and land with flowing water, that is river, a smaller tract with flowing water is preferable to a larger, drier one, because with flowing water, which is always available, the production of crops is assured. Unquote. Second, the same man suggested an interest rates of 120% and 240% on commercial loans involving highly risky travel through forest and by sea respectively. And this was 3,000 years ago, my friends. And it was enunciated in Arthashastra, the book, the treatise on statecraft, economy, taxation, etc., by none other than Chanakya. He did not know how to really quantify risk, but he definitely knew how to identify risk and how to get the risk premium for risky ventures. So, since 3,000 years on, the world has changed much. Today, it's the single largest transformation driver for the world is the interconnectivity, the open internet, and the mobile revolution that is now coming. Today we live in an age of instant information that's both good and bad. And it's at speeds which are never heard like before, speeds which are never thought of before. And we are interconnected. Physical boundaries really have taken a back seat. However, because of the dissolution of these physical and political boundaries, there are new protectionist barriers, which is more around the economics that are coming up. Trade pacts like NAFTA and some other areas. We are a little bit away in SARC, but I guess we'll crack the code soon. So what has this done? These have brought new challenges to us. And clearly, if you look at the World Economic Forum report of 2015, there are 10 risks with high impact and 10 risks with high likelihood. And guess what? The one which is most likely to impact the world in the next 10 years is the scarcity of water. And similarly, you have information-related risk, you have risk related to political upheavals, social unrest, and social media. All of this in this changed world. So these are things that you'll have to confound as the CFO's role changes. What I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes or 12 minutes is just describe the new role of CFOs, how they are kind of moving on to the new pastures, as has been discussed ad nauseum several times in the morning's forum, but also from a more specific focus as to what their expanded role means. And I will pick about 4 topics from there, and we will talk a little bit more about that. So the traditional CFO, right? We know him as the Chief Financial Officer. Do you think that he can be insulated when you have a tsunami of a perfect storm where all the factors are flowing around him? No businesses are insulated, nor are the people who are running it, and CFO certainly not. So what does that CFO mean? Is he going to be the traditional bean counter? I don't think so. He is going to be the Chief Future Officer. In other words, he is no longer going to be the bean counter, the one guy who will sit and report, the guy who will take care of compliances, the guy who is mostly post facto. But he will be looking or participating more in driving the strategy, making sure that the future is as well prepared as one can be from a business standpoint. There are increasing demands on the CFO as he takes on these new roles. And if you think about it, again, as was mentioned in the morning, right? CFOs are taking new role. They're getting a seat at the board table where the strategies are decided, discussed, decisions made. CFOs are co-leading businesses with CEOs. And gentlemen, a lot of the CFOs are just a hyphen away from becoming CEOs, and several of them have become. In other words, they are becoming like a Swiss knife, but with specialist knowledge. So what does the board expect of the CFO? I'm sorry, we are a little bit lagged on the presentation, so we had a little technical issues, but I'll try to keep up with it. So what does the board expect of the CFO? There are several things that it expects. It expects the CFO to be the independent voice of reason. It expects it to bring the rigor and discipline of a financial function. It also expects to have the conviction to kind of say the hard truths. And one of them comes from identifying and highlighting risks. So let's look at the CFO at the board. Where is it that he can bring value? And by the way, our topic which describes CFO from the boardroom to the bottom line, the bottom line is now a new bottom line. Typically, finance function thinks of bottom line as profit, right? The bottom line of the P&L. Friends, with the changing role of the CFO, the bottom line will change into anything that he does. If there is a new project that's coming up, whether it is capital allocation, whether there is a project that needs to be divested of, whether there needs to be a JV, any of the matters, there's a new bottom line which essentially means validated by the CFO. So taking a little different approach from morning where they said CFO is no longer responsible, well, if you are sitting at the board where you're part of decision making, you will be responsible. So we will pick on 4 things. Effective enterprise risk management from the top, strategic risk management to the performance management, how do you link the two, and then information risk management, which is the topic of the, which is sort of the hot topic, right? Let's move on. So let me just sort of give a little bit of a brief for some of you who might know a lot about risk and enterprise risk. This might be a repeat, but just to sort of keep the flow in context, let me just explain very quickly. So when you think of an ERM, right, I mean, it's a pretty settled position that there are 4 types of risk. The discussion at the board level is not about what are the different types of risk. It is not about which risk framework to use. It is more about what is the business, what is the risk to the business strategy. And when you talk about risk to the business strategy, you're talking of 2 things. One is, what is the risk to the strategy? And the second one is looking at the risk of the strategy. So when you're talking of risk to the strategy, it is about whether you have considered various factors. Risk, the second part is more about looking at allocating resources, people, process, technology, and more, capital, right? And then when you're sort of having this conversation at the board level, the discussion pretty much you kind of put it in a framework which basically takes the risk discussion into a strategic level. So even if something is coming from a risk management, a risk register, you are taking the discussion to a totally new level, which a lot of the boards are expecting you to bring to their highlight. There are several surveys out there, both of the Western companies and mostly of the Western companies, which talk about the preparedness of the board in terms of really looking at the risk management as a key value driver. And those numbers are dismal, especially for the non-banking sector. Banking sector has been driven by regulation, etc., so they are a little bit ahead. There are different issues, but we'll keep the context broad. By and large, basically it needs more involvement from the board, and this is where it starts. So when you think about the conventional risk management, right, it is a bottom-up approach. You have a risk register, and risks are identified by the businesses. You have a likelihood, you have a responsible person, etc., etc. There's a problem. The bottom-up approach, after a while, becomes tedious. It is more about people rolling their eyes. This is something I know. There's nothing going to happen, etc. It loses its value over time. So what do you need to do? Is you need to kind of empower this you need to translate this message throughout the organization, and when the message is driven from top, that's when ERM really becomes effective. So there is a bottom-up bubbling up of risks that are being identified on all the 4 segments that we spoke about, and then you kind of look at the other part. CFOs can play a very important role when the risks are coming from the operational side. They can take the role of a champion, an advocate, to really kind of highlight, say these are the kind of risk allocation that you need, and the board can determine the risk appetite, the kind of capital allocation needed, what are the downsides. And by the way, they can also look at various other aspects in terms of how the risk register can be a little bit more effective. This is just a snapshot of a risk register, which is a bottom-up approach. We just thought we'll just put it up just so for the to make the story complete, right? Let's look at what's the next part of this part. So this is where the CFO's role really comes into play. When you're trying to look at a ERM from a top-down approach, you want to do things that will help the board to really embrace risk management and really understand that every decision that is being taken is sort of viewed through the lens of risk management, and then you kind of get a comfort in terms of what needs to happen. So one is you provide a platform for the top management to discuss risks. The second is you provide a charter to the board, which basically outlines what are the key risks, what is the risk appetite, and what are the different levels, what are the different areas that you can kind of take risk, and what needs to come to the board, right? And then of course you need to have, like everybody else, you need to have a risk dashboard. Here's an example, just to keep the story complete again. There are probably different ways to put the visualization as was seen this morning. So the CFO can become the steward who nudges the board when the enterprise risk management is being defined at the top. There is a tone at the top that percolates all the way through the organization and down, and this is where the C-suite and the other stakeholders are really involved in terms of the strategic aspect of, like I think Gagan said this morning, for us risk is all about what are the impediments to my objective, which is nothing but what are the impediments for my strategy not being implemented. So this is the part about the boardroom. So this is the expectation that is built up from the board and boards and businesses. So at the board level, what the board really wants to understand is two things. One is how do we tie the business plans or the future planning to risk management? In other words, can there be a assessment of business plans and strategies where the risk takes a backseat? I don't think so. That's more the traditional approach. You look at the ROIs, you look at the NPVs, etc. You look at certain risk factors, and that's about it. The new world is all about pushing the risk boundary further and sort of making it more strategic and baking in methods which will help you apply probabilistic models, likely impacts, and these will be the ones which will be helpful. So the board also is really looking forward to not just the downside risk. There is what is called as the upside. What if I don't do this? What am I missing? So the board, the CFO really is in a really great position to drive these discussions to say, okay, here's the upside risk, here's the downside risk, and when you're doing the evaluation of competing priorities, then you kind of get a really clear picture, and the board is can help drive a lot of these. So when the business planning currently happens, what the board gets to see is really the final numbers, the competing priorities, and this is where when you tie the two, that's when the risk, the finance head or the new chief future officer has to balance his instinct of risk, conservativeness, and everything that is traditionally known of him, and also of the risk versus the demands and growth of the business that is required. You truly cannot tilt the scale one way or the other, which is just going to be an existential disaster for the company. And clearly, as a strategic management, when you're driving it down, you want to make sure that there are right incentives that really incentivize people to take the right risks, not necessarily take no risk. Well, that would just not do it. We have to just make sure that the balance is right and the right risks are taken. So moving forward, right, if you look at it from the top, strategic risk is really an art. You really cannot put it down into a science. I mean, is one risk better than others? You can rely on a lot of statistical tools which will help you sort of guide you, but not necessarily, it's not a quantum mechanism. However, when you look at today's artificial intelligence and the computers, the way they're going, the day might not be far off and the judgmental part will be very small. But yet, until that time comes, the CFOs will play this role very quite importantly. Second, when you look at operational risk, this is all about assets. This is all about how do you kind of make the best use of assets, are there processes in place, and this is where the CFO's role becomes important in operational risk, because which of the operational risks are critical? That's when there is a more robust discussion, and you can turn the focus lights onto areas in the operations where you want to focus, including what is the risk culture within the company. And that's the last point, right? You could have all the best of the tools. You could have the best board that really wants to embrace risk management. There is a charter, there is a risk management committee at the top which really meets frequently, as I think one of the panelists in the morning was saying, they meet twice a month. That's fantastic. However, if it does not percolate down, there is nothing that you can do. If the guy at the bottom in the front line says everything is hunky-dory, it just reminds me of that Iraq war, right? I mean, you could hear the tanks shelling, whereas this guy, Abdullah, he was saying, Baghdad is safe, we don't have any foreign troops. Come on, that's not true, right? So clearly the culture needs to percolate and it needs to go down, and it has to be a two-way approach. So that's where the top-down and the bottom-up approach has to go together. The other aspect which is really bothering one of the key things in the digital era, in this day of digital world, where the information travels at the speed of light, even before you know it, probably somebody else knows it. You don't want to get your company's name in the front pages of the newspaper. It has a direct impact on the value of the enterprise, whether it is, and geographic boundaries don't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're in a small town or you're in a big town or a big city or a metropolis. It just doesn't matter. There is a mobile phone, there is a camera, and that's it. Small towns in US are able to broadcast news clips which basically have just shaken that nation up. Just a few weeks ago, if you followed the news carefully, it was another very tragic accident in Mumbai, but the highlight was the name of the company, not the individual. The individual was because the name of the company. So there is a risk that is it will take a market cap off very hard and fast. I'll give you some examples. Also in the boards and the enterprise at large, you don't have to look at this as a mere exercise. I think one of the panelists again mentioned this in the morning. It is not about crisis management. It is more about getting ahead of the curve, being able to address it, being able to identify it. And this is where one of the topics that you'll be talking this afternoon is about big data. If you are able to mine big data, you will be able to get ahead of the curve from a risk management standpoint. But you will also be benefited from the kind of data that you will be able to generate to say, here's a potential business opportunity. So there is a two-way benefit of big data analysis if you're able to get it right. Okay, let's move on. Reputational risk. Does this sound familiar? 5-10% knocked off straight away? This is more an act of God, the boat being blown up. Company share tanking about 30%, going up 30% simply on some false rumors. Went down circuit breakers and went down before it went up. Just yo-yo ride, volatility. So reputational risk is another area which is very important. Currently, boards are not very impressed. There are surveys out there which say the kind of questions that the board asks and the responses that they're getting are really not that actionable. That is not something that they can think strategically, how they can embed that into the system or how they can drive strategy. That is where the board also needs to make sure that when you're implementing an ERM system, it does not become bureaucratic, it does not become a routine rote exercise, just a compliance tick box. That is surely bound to result in greater disaster. Sorry guys. So the right mix would be to sort of combine the top-down and the bottom-up approach, get the benefits of both sides and implement an excellent ERM system. What is the benefit of a strategic risk management and the ERM system? You get to focus on the projects with the highest impacts, whether it's positive or negative. You get to manage the actions that are required to make the performance goals. You also get to see what is the likely impact. There are some great studies that kind of show that you can use some data and see if these parameters fell down or if this is my bottom worst off risk, then how much would it impact on my future cash flows and stuff like that. So there's some great stuff that you can do, which is about applying the probabilistic models. So let me run through. I've got a notice that I'm running out of time. Strategic risk management. This is where the Chief Future Officer will start leading the board as well, plays a vital role, becomes the advocate. And they can use the dashboards. I'll run quickly through these slides. The next part is about risk management to performance management. This is the key. So we have spoken about how they can make a difference in the board. The next thing you want to make sure is how do you make sure that what is discussed in the board is really implemented. So that is where you kind of combine, and when the plans are made, when the performances are reviewed, it is not just about quant data and non-quant data. There should be a third element. What is the risk did you take if you made so much money, or what is the risk you did not take to kind of lose so much money? That is the third dimension to this in terms of looking at the bottom line. Information risk management. You have a very engaging session in the afternoon. I will just put up some slides there. Statistics. By far, the most vulnerable area. Data is the new currency which basically will make or mar your valuations. If you don't protect your data, the enterprises are very vulnerable. It is leaving a house or your chest of valuables without a proper lock and key. However, you have to, whereas the businesses in technology are tending to focus on giving customer services, however, the Chief Future Officer's role will become important to partner with the CIO and sort of drive the agenda to say, hey, you also need to invest to make sure that we are covered, right? So I will quickly put this up and run through this. Basically, we are kind of saying that the CFO, to have a great information security risk profile, has to take the agenda from the CIO in conjunction and be the advocate. Identify what the risks are, identify what the investments are required, assess the impacts, and then take it to the board. They are the best placed position to canvass this. So with that, let me close my presentation. Hopefully this was useful, and thank you for your patient listening.